The narrator's relationship with their ex was not a typical long-term commitment but rather an on-and-off cycle that lasted 4 to 5 years. This kind of dynamic often indicates deep emotional entanglement, but also unresolved issues that prevent stability. Relationships that fluctuate like this can be emotionally draining because they lack consistency. One moment, everything seems fine, and the next, it's falling apart. This instability can create anxiety and confusion, as one never knows what to expect. People often remain in such relationships due to a mix of love, hope, and emotional dependency. The highs can feel exhilarating, making the lows seem like temporary setbacks rather than signs of a deeper problem. When two people continuously break up and reconcile, it can feel like destiny pulling them back together, but in reality, it may just be unhealthy attachment and an inability to let go. At the time, the narrator may not have fully realized how damaging this cycle was. When deeply involved in a relationship, it's easy to rationalize behavior that, from an outsider's perspective, would be seen as a clear sign to walk away. The on-and-off nature of their connection may have given them false hope that things could eventually work out, leading them to endure repeated emotional stress. Another reason people stay in unstable relationships is the fear of being alone. After investing years into a relationship, walking away can feel like abandoning all that effort. The narrator may have believed that because they kept coming back together, there was something special worth holding on to. However, stability is a core component of a healthy relationship, and without it, both partners are likely to suffer. One significant consequence of an unstable relationship is the emotional toll it takes over time. The back-and-forth nature creates a roller coaster effect, where the brain becomes conditioned to expect unpredictability. This can lead to emotional exhaustion, self-doubt, and even a diminished sense of self-worth. Instead of feeling secure and loved, the person caught in the cycle may start questioning their value and whether they deserve better. Looking back, the narrator realizes how chaotic this relationship was. What may have felt like minor breakups at the time now seem like red flags that should have ended things much sooner. The instability likely prevented them from experiencing emotional peace, contributing to long-term stress and eventually, depression. The key lesson from this experience is that true love and compatibility don't require constant breakups and reconciliations. A healthy relationship is built on trust, stability, and mutual respect, not a continuous loop of separations and reunions. Recognizing unhealthy patterns and having the strength to break free from them is crucial for emotional well-being. Infidelity is one of the most painful experiences in a relationship, and in this case, the narrator's ex was involved with multiple partners throughout their on and off relationship. The cheating first happened about a year into their relationship, which is relatively early for such a serious breach of trust. However, rather than being an isolated incident, it became a recurring pattern. Over the course of their relationship, the ex reportedly became involved with 10 to 15 different people while still maintaining some level of emotional or physical connection with the narrator. This repeated behavior suggests that cheating was not just a mistake but a deeply ingrained part of the ex's approach to relationships. Some people cheat because of emotional dissatisfaction, while others do it for excitement, validation, or a sense of control. In this case, the ex seemed to follow a predictable pattern. She would leave the narrator, be with someone else, and then return. The fact that she did this multiple times indicates that she never truly wanted to commit but also wasn't willing to completely let go. For the narrator, this was likely a confusing and emotionally exhausting experience. Each time the relationship ended, they may have believed it was truly over, only for their ex to return, reigniting the hope that things could work out. This kind of cycle can be psychologically damaging because it prevents closure. When a relationship ends definitively, both partners can heal and move on, but when it ends temporarily, there is always a lingering "what if" that makes it harder to break free. Why do people stay after infidelity? One of the most common questions in situations like this is, why did the narrator stay? Why did they continue getting back together with someone who repeatedly sought out other people? The answer is often more complex than just love. Hope for change. Many people believe that their partner will change, that the cheating was just a phase, or that circumstances will improve. If the relationship has strong emotional ties, it's easy to convince oneself that things will get better. Emotional dependency. After years in a relationship, even a toxic one, people become emotionally attached. The idea of leaving can feel overwhelming, especially if the person has become a significant part of their daily life. Excitement and drama. While this may seem counterintuitive, some people get addicted to the highs and lows of an unstable relationship. The uncertainty, breakups, and makeups create an intense emotional experience that can become addictive. Self-worth issues. Over time, being cheated on can damage a person's self-esteem, making them feel like they aren't worthy of a better relationship. They may internalize the idea that this is what they deserve, leading them to stay even when they know they shouldn't. In this case, the narrator wasn't deeply affected by the cheating itself, at least, not in a traditional sense. They even admitted that they found it somewhat exciting. This suggests that their emotional pain didn't come from the betrayal itself but rather from something deeper: the manipulation, the lies, and the way the ex justified her behavior. The psychological effects of repeated cheating. Even if someone claims not to be hurt by infidelity, repeated exposure to betrayal can have long-term psychological effects. Studies show that being cheated on repeatedly can lead to trust issues. After being betrayed multiple times, people may struggle to trust future partners, even those who are loyal. The fear of being hurt again can create emotional distance in future relationships. Emotional numbness. Some people, after experiencing repeated betrayal, stop feeling strong emotions altogether. They become desensitized to hurt, which can lead to unhealthy coping mechanisms like suppressing feelings or avoiding deep connections. Depression and anxiety. Constantly being in a state of uncertainty and betrayal can take a toll on mental health. Feelings of worthlessness, sadness, and hopelessness can develop, even if they aren't immediately recognized. The narrator eventually realized that, while they weren't necessarily hurt by the cheating itself, the entire situation contributed to their emotional decline. At the time, they may not have fully processed how damaging it was, but looking back, they see how it played a role in their eventual slide into depression. Final thoughts. In any relationship, trust and respect are the foundation. If a person repeatedly seeks out other partners, it shows a fundamental disregard for the commitment and the emotions of their significant other. In this case, the ex's behavior wasn't just about cheating, it was about constantly disrupting the relationship and manipulating the narrator into staying in a toxic cycle. Looking back, the narrator acknowledges that this pattern wasn't healthy. Recognizing this is an important step toward healing and ensuring that future relationships are based on trust, stability, and mutual respect rather than chaos and betrayal. One of the most striking aspects of this story is how the ex rationalized her behavior. Rather than admitting to cheating, she insisted that she never actually did anything wrong because, according to her, she always broke things off before getting involved with someone else. In her mind, this technicality absolved her of any wrongdoing. This kind of justification is a common manipulation tactic that people use to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. At first glance, her argument might seem somewhat logical. If she wasn't in a relationship at the exact moment she was with someone else, could it really be called cheating? However, this kind of reasoning ignores the emotional reality of relationships. The fact that she repeatedly ended things, only to return shortly after, suggests that she was never truly committed to being with the narrator but still wanted to maintain control over the relationship. The problem with technicalities in relationships. Many people use technical loopholes to justify behavior that would otherwise be considered unacceptable. This can include "we were on a break" mentality, the idea that a brief, temporary breakup makes it okay to be with someone else, even if both partners know they will likely get back together. Emotional cheating dismissal. Some people argue that if no physical intimacy occurred, it doesn't count as cheating, even if they were emotionally involved with someone else. Blame shifting. Instead of taking responsibility, they may accuse their partner of being too controlling, jealous, or insecure for having a problem with their actions. In this case, the ex's justification was particularly manipulative because she framed her actions as completely innocent. She created a scenario where, technically, she wasn't cheating, even though, from an emotional standpoint, she was betraying the narrator repeatedly. This kind of behavior can be extremely damaging to the person on the receiving end, as it makes them question their own perception of reality. Gaslighting, twisting reality to avoid blame. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where a person makes someone else doubt their own thoughts, memories, or perception of events. The narrator experienced this firsthand when their ex repeatedly insisted that she had never cheated. Even though the narrator knew she had been with other people while they were still emotionally connected, she continually reframed the situation in a way that made it seem as though she had done nothing wrong. This kind of manipulation can be incredibly frustrating and even harmful over time. Some common signs of gaslighting include denying facts. Even when confronted with clear evidence, the person insists that what happened didn't actually happen or happened differently. Minimizing feelings. They make the other person feel like they are overreacting or being irrational for feeling hurt. Shifting blame. Instead of acknowledging their own wrongdoing, they turn the situation around and make the victim feel like they are the problem. For the narrator, the most upsetting part of the relationship wasn't even the cheating itself, it was the gaslighting. They describe it as intellectually insulting, which highlights just how frustrating it can be to argue with someone who constantly twists the truth. It's not just about being lied to, it's about feeling like the other person is deliberately distorting reality to avoid taking accountability. Why people use gaslighting in relationships? People who gaslight often do so because they don't want to deal with the consequences of their actions. In this case, the ex likely knew that what she was doing was wrong but didn't want to take responsibility. By constantly bending the truth and reframing the narrative, she was able to avoid guilt. If she convinced herself, and the narrator, that she wasn't actually cheating, she didn't have to feel bad about it. Maintain control. By keeping the narrator confused and uncertain, she was able to ensure that he wouldn't fully walk away. Justify her actions. If she could argue that she technically wasn't doing anything wrong, she could continue her behavior without facing moral conflict. For the narrator, this was particularly frustrating because they could see through the manipulation. They weren't completely blindsided, they recognized what was happening but still found themselves caught in the cycle. This is one of the most difficult aspects of being gaslit. Even when you know you're being manipulated, it can still make you second-guess yourself. The emotional impact of gaslighting. While the narrator states that they weren't deeply affected by the infidelity itself, the gaslighting had a lasting impact. When someone repeatedly denies your reality, it can make you feel crazy, exhausted, and even helpless. Over time, this kind of manipulation can lead to self-doubt, constantly questioning whether your feelings are valid or if you're being irrational. Emotional exhaustion, feeling drained from constantly having to defend your own perception of events. Loss of confidence, starting to believe that your thoughts and judgments are unreliable. In relationships, honesty and communication are essential. When one person refuses to acknowledge reality, it creates an imbalance of power where the other person is left feeling uncertain and powerless. The narrator's frustration wasn't just about the lies, it was about the disrespect of being treated as if they couldn't see the truth for themselves. Final thoughts. Looking back, the narrator realizes that the gaslighting was a major source of emotional distress. While they weren't necessarily devastated by the cheating, they were deeply frustrated by the way their ex manipulated the situation to avoid responsibility. This kind of behavior is a red flag in any relationship, as it shows a fundamental lack of respect and honesty. Ultimately, relationships should be built on trust, mutual understanding, and accountability. When one person consistently rewrites the truth to suit their own actions, it creates an unhealthy dynamic that can leave the other person feeling lost and emotionally drained. Recognizing gaslighting for what it is an important step toward breaking free from toxic relationships and ensuring healthier connections in the future. One of the most defining aspects of this relationship was the constant cycle of breaking up, the ex seeing other people, and then coming back to reconcile. This pattern repeated itself multiple times, keeping the narrator emotionally trapped in an unhealthy situation. While it might have felt normal at the time, looking back, they now realize how damaging it was. This kind of push-pull dynamic in relationships is not uncommon. It is often driven by a mix of emotional dependency, unresolved attachment issues, and manipulation. The ex would leave, explore other options, and then return as if nothing had happened. This made it nearly impossible for the narrator to heal and move on. Each time the relationship ended, there was always the possibility of a reunion, which prolonged the emotional confusion and kept them stuck in a toxic loop. Why do people return to toxic relationships? There are several reasons why people stay in or return to relationships that are clearly harmful. In the case of the narrator, there are a few possible explanations. Emotional bonding and habit. Being with someone for years creates a deep emotional attachment, even if the relationship is unhealthy. The mind and body get used to the presence of that person, making separation feel unnatural. Every time they got back together, the familiarity may have provided comfort, even if deep down, the narrator knew it wouldn't last. The hope for change. Many people in toxic relationships believe that the other person will eventually change. The ex returning each time might have felt like a sign that she wanted to be with the narrator for real, when in reality, it was just part of a cycle of manipulation. Fear of letting go. Walking away from a long-term relationship can be terrifying, even when it's toxic. The narrator might have feared the emotional pain of cutting ties completely, so they accepted the repeated reunions instead. Intermittent reinforcement, the gambling effect. This psychological principle explains why people get addicted to unhealthy relationships. If someone gets rewarded sometimes but not all the time, they are more likely to stay, even if the situation is mostly bad. The good moments in the relationship may have been enough to keep the narrator hoping for a better future, even when reality showed otherwise. How the repeated cycle affected the narrator. Over time, this cycle took a serious emotional toll on the narrator. At the time, it may not have seemed as damaging, but in hindsight, they recognize how mentally exhausting and toxic the situation really was. The constant uncertainty and lack of closure likely led to Increased anxiety, never knowing when the next breakup or reconciliation would happen. Lowered self-worth, feeling like they weren't good enough to be chosen over and over again. Emotional fatigue, the stress of being caught in the same painful cycle repeatedly. Each time the ex left, it may have felt like the final goodbye. But every time she came back, it reopened wounds that were never fully healed. This prevented the narrator from fully processing the breakups and moving on. Instead, they remained emotionally stuck, living in a state of false hope and manipulation. Did the ex truly want to be in the relationship? Looking at the situation from the ex's perspective, her behavior suggests that she never fully wanted to commit. Instead, she seemed to treat the relationship as a backup plan while she explored other options. Each time she left, she was seeking something new, but when those experiences didn't work out, she returned to the narrator because she knew she would be accepted back. This is a classic case of someone keeping a safety net while refusing to fully commit. The ex may have enjoyed the emotional security of knowing the narrator would always be there. She avoided responsibility for her actions by breaking up before cheating, allowing herself the freedom to do whatever she wanted without the guilt. Breaking free from the cycle. Recognizing a toxic pattern is one thing, breaking free from it is another. For many people caught in cycles like this, it takes a major realization or a significant emotional breaking point to finally walk away. The narrator, looking back, now sees how unhealthy the situation was, but at the time, they were too emotionally involved to see it clearly. To break free from a cycle like this, one must acknowledge the pattern. Understanding that it's not just bad luck or circumstance, but a repeated toxic behavior. Cut off contact. The only way to fully move on is to stop allowing the other person to return. This might mean blocking them, avoiding mutual friends, and refusing to entertain their excuses. Rebuild self-esteem. Toxic relationships can damage self-worth, making it crucial to focus on self-love and healing. Therapy, journaling, or talking to supportive friends can help rebuild confidence. Set clear boundaries for future relationships. Learning from past experiences to identify red flags early. Refusing to accept a partner who disrespects commitment or honesty. Final thoughts. In hindsight, the narrator now realizes that what they went through wasn't just a complicated relationship, it was a cycle of emotional manipulation. The repeated breakups and reconciliations were not signs of love, but a toxic loop that kept them emotionally trapped. What makes this realization so painful is the feeling of regret, knowing that they allowed this to continue for years when they could have walked away sooner. However, it's important to remember that learning from past mistakes is what truly matters. Now, with this awareness, the narrator can move forward, ensuring that they never fall into a similar pattern again. A healthy relationship should provide security, consistency, and trust, not constant uncertainty and emotional exhaustion. One of the most profound consequences of the narrator's experience was the toll it took on their mental and emotional well-being. While they might not have realized it at the time, looking back, they now see how the repeated betrayals, gaslighting, and manipulation contributed to their slide into depression. This is a key realization because toxic relationships don't just end when the relationship ends, the effects can linger long after, shaping a person's self-worth, trust in others, and overall emotional stability. How toxic relationships lead to depression. Depression often stems from prolonged exposure to stress, emotional pain, and psychological manipulation. In this case, the narrator spent years in a cycle of hope and disappointment, constantly dealing with feelings of betrayal, frustration, and confusion. There are several ways in which this kind of relationship can push someone toward depression. Constant emotional turmoil. The back-and-forth nature of the relationship meant the narrator was always in a state of uncertainty. One moment, they were in love and hopeful for the future, the next, they were abandoned and left questioning everything. This kind of instability creates chronic stress, which can drain a person emotionally over time. Loss of self-worth. Being cheated on repeatedly, even if the ex claimed it wasn't technically cheating, sends a subconscious message. I am not enough. I am not worth loyalty or honesty. I am replaceable. These thoughts, even if not consciously acknowledged, can slowly erode self-confidence, leading to feelings of hopelessness and depression. Gaslighting and self-doubt. The ex's refusal to take responsibility for her actions meant that the narrator was constantly forced to question their own reality. This kind of mental manipulation can make a person feel like they are losing their grip on the truth, leading to deep frustration, anger, and exhaustion. Over time, it can cause emotional numbness, where the person feels so drained that they stop caring about things they once loved. Isolation and shame. One of the most painful parts of the narrator's reflection is that they never openly talked about their experience because they felt like a complete moron for staying in the relationship for so long. This highlights a major problem with toxic relationships: Victims often blame themselves instead of recognizing that they were manipulated. The shame of being fooled or taken advantage of can make a person withdraw from friends and family, leading to further isolation and loneliness, both of which are major contributors to depression. The subtle descent into depression. Depression doesn't always hit suddenly, it often creeps in slowly, making it difficult to recognize at first. For the narrator, the signs may have included feeling exhausted all the time, emotionally draining relationships leave little energy for anything else. Losing interest in things that once brought joy, depression makes even hobbies, friends, and passions feel meaningless. Feeling stuck and hopeless, the repeated cycle with the ex may have made it seem like there was no way out. Blaming themselves, instead of seeing the ex as the problem, they felt foolish for staying, which only deepened their self-criticism. By the time they realized how much this relationship had affected them, they were already in a dark emotional place. This is the hidden danger of toxic relationships. They don't just hurt in the moment, they have lasting effects that can change how a person sees themselves and the world. How depression warps reality. One of the cruelest aspects of depression is that it distorts a person's thinking. Instead of seeing the situation objectively, the mind turns against itself. It's my fault for staying. No, it's not. Love makes people hopeful, forgiving, and patient, which are all good qualities in a healthy relationship but can be used against them in a toxic one. I was stupid to let this happen. No, you weren't. Manipulative people are skilled at keeping their victims emotionally hooked. I'll never have a healthy relationship. Not true. Recognizing the toxic pattern is the first step toward breaking free and building something better in the future. Depression makes it hard to see hope or solutions, which is why many people stay stuck in painful memories long after a bad relationship ends. Breaking free from the emotional damage. Healing from a toxic relationship takes time, and recovering from depression is not as simple as just moving on. It requires deliberate effort to rebuild emotional strength and self-worth. Some key steps include acknowledging that it wasn't your fault, realizing that being manipulated isn't the same as being weak, understanding that people stay in toxic relationships for psychological reasons, not because they are foolish, processing the pain instead of burying it. Writing about the experience, like the narrator is doing now, helps make sense of it. Talking to a therapist can help untangle the emotional damage left behind. Allowing yourself to grieve the relationship, even if it was unhealthy, can be part of the healing process. Rebuilding self-esteem. Doing things that remind you of your own worth, like learning new skills, setting personal goals, and surrounding yourself with positive people. Recognizing that your value is not determined by how someone else treated you. Cutting ties completely. The best way to fully heal is to remove any connection to the toxic ex. No more, just checking in messages, no following their social media, no keeping old pictures. Closure doesn't come from getting an apology, it comes from realizing you don't need one to move on. Final thoughts. Depression after a toxic relationship is completely normal, but it doesn't have to last forever. The narrator now sees how much this experience shaped their emotional well-being, but recognizing the problem is a huge step toward healing. The next steps are about reclaiming power, rebuilding confidence, and understanding that their past does not define their future. One of the most striking aspects of the narrator's experience is that, even after everything they went through, they never openly talked about it with anyone. They admit to feeling like a complete moron for staying in the relationship so long, which is a clear sign that they were struggling with internalized shame. This kind of silence is incredibly common among people who have been in toxic relationships, especially those that involve manipulation, gaslighting, and infidelity. At the core of this silence is the fear of judgment. The narrator likely worried that if they opened up about their experience, people would respond with statements like, "Why didn't you just leave? How could you let that happen to you? I would never put up with that." What makes this reaction so painful is that it blames the victim instead of acknowledging the complexity of toxic relationships. People who haven't been in similar situations often don't understand how manipulation, emotional dependency, and self-doubt can keep someone trapped, even when they know they deserve better. Why people stay silent after toxic relationships. There are several reasons why survivors of toxic relationships struggle to speak about their experiences. Fear of being judged. Society tends to blame people for allowing toxic behavior rather than understanding how manipulation works. The narrator likely didn't want to hear people tell them they should have left sooner, which would only make them feel worse. Embarrassment and self-blame. When someone looks back on a painful relationship, they often feel ashamed for tolerating things they now see as unacceptable. The narrator called themselves a complete moron, which shows how deeply they internalized the idea that they were at fault. Emotional exhaustion. After years of being caught in a cycle of breakups, gaslighting, and emotional distress, they may have felt too drained to even talk about it. Sometimes, it feels easier to push things down and avoid reliving the pain rather than process it openly, minimizing the experience. Since the narrator wasn't deeply affected by the cheating itself, they may have convinced themselves that it wasn't that bad. However, the long-term psychological impact, depression, self-doubt, loss of trust, shows that the experience was significant, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. Lack of a support system. The narrator may not have had close friends or family who they felt safe enough to open up to. Many people who experience toxic relationships isolate themselves, whether intentionally or because their partner made them feel like no one else would understand. The problem with keeping it all inside. While staying silent might feel like the safest option, bottling up emotions often leads to more damage in the long run. When painful experiences aren't properly processed, they can manifest in different ways. Increased anxiety and overthinking, constantly replaying the relationship in your mind, wondering if you were at fault. Difficulty trusting future partners, carrying the emotional wounds into new relationships, fearing the same thing will happen again. Feeling stuck in the past, without talking about it, the emotional pain lingers much longer than it should. For the narrator, this silence became a barrier to healing. By not addressing what happened openly, they likely prolonged their feelings of shame and self-doubt. How to overcome internalized shame? Healing from a toxic relationship isn't just about moving on, it's about rebuilding self-worth and letting go of the shame that was never yours to carry. Here are some key ways to break the silence and start healing. 1. Reframing the narrative. Instead of saying, "I was stupid for staying," shift to, "I was manipulated, and I was doing my best with the information I had at the time. I stayed because I believed in love, and that is not something to be ashamed of. I learned from this, and I won't let it happen again." Toxic relationships thrive on making the victim feel responsible for what happened. Recognizing that it was not your fault is one of the most powerful steps toward healing. 2. Talking to someone who understands. If opening up to friends or family feels too overwhelming, a therapist or support group can be a great first step. Online communities and forums for survivors of toxic relationships can provide a safe space to share without fear of judgment. 3. Writing it out. Journaling can help process emotions without the fear of judgment. Writing a letter, even if you don't send it, to the ex can be a way to release built-up resentment and hurt. 4. Recognizing growth instead of regret. Instead of feeling ashamed of the past, focus on how much you've grown from the experience. You now understand manipulation tactics and can recognize them in the future. You survived and came out stronger, even if it didn't feel that way at the time. You now know what red flags to look for in future relationships. Breaking the cycle of silence. One of the biggest realizations for survivors of toxic relationships is that talking about it doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong. It takes courage to admit you were in a painful situation, and even more courage to acknowledge that you deserved better. For the narrator, keeping everything inside for so long may have made healing more difficult. However, by reflecting on their experience now, they are already taking the first step toward letting go of the shame and reclaiming their own story. After enduring years of emotional turmoil, gaslighting, and manipulation, the narrator now looks back at their experience with a new perspective. At the time, they may not have fully grasped the extent of the damage, but in hindsight, they realize how deeply it affected them. While the relationship was a source of pain and confusion, it also became a crucial learning experience, one that shaped their understanding of love, self-worth, and emotional resilience. This phase of reflection is essential. Many people who survive toxic relationships struggle with moving forward because they remain stuck in regret or self-blame. However, by analyzing past mistakes, one can transform pain into wisdom and use those lessons to build a healthier future. The importance of self-reflection. Self-reflection allows survivors of toxic relationships to process their emotions, identify unhealthy patterns, and gain clarity on what they need to change moving forward. For the narrator, looking back on their relationship helps them understand why they stayed so long. Instead of blaming themselves for not leaving earlier, they now recognize how emotional attachment, hope, and manipulation kept them in the cycle. They likely stayed because they wanted to believe in the potential of the relationship rather than accepting the reality. How gaslighting affected them. At the time, they may have been too close to the situation to see the full impact of the gaslighting. Now, they can see how constantly questioning their own reality drained them mentally and emotionally. What they learned about themselves. They may have discovered a tendency to ignore red flags or prioritize their partner's needs over their own. However, they also learned that they are capable of enduring hardships and coming out stronger. What they want in future relationships. The biggest takeaway from a toxic relationship is understanding what is unacceptable moving forward. The narrator likely now values honesty, emotional stability, and mutual respect more than ever before. Key lessons from the experience. Surviving a toxic relationship is painful, but it can also be a powerful teacher. Here are some of the most valuable lessons the narrator may have gained. 1. Recognizing red flags early. Gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and cycles of breaking up and getting back together are major warning signs. If a partner repeatedly betrays trust and refuses to take responsibility, it's a clear sign they will not change. 2. Trusting intuition over words. One of the most damaging aspects of gaslighting is that it makes the victim doubt their own perceptions. The narrator may have felt something was wrong but ignored it because their ex always had an excuse. Moving forward, they may be more likely to trust their gut instinct rather than rationalizing away red flags. 3. Setting boundaries and sticking to them. In a healthy relationship, boundaries should be respected, not tested. The narrator now understands the importance of clearly defining what they will and will not tolerate. If someone pushes past their boundaries, they will no longer make excuses for them. 4. Understanding that love shouldn't be painful. Many people in toxic relationships confuse intensity with love. Just because a relationship is passionate, chaotic, or emotionally overwhelming doesn't mean it's good. Healthy love feels secure, respectful, and mutual, not like a roller coaster. 5. Valuing their own worth. One of the biggest takeaways from the relationship is that they deserved better all along. Just because they were treated poorly doesn't mean they were unworthy of love, it means their ex was incapable of providing it. Breaking the cycle, how to avoid similar relationships in the future. One of the biggest fears after leaving a toxic relationship is falling into the same pattern again. Many people unknowingly gravitate toward familiar dynamics, even when they are unhealthy. However, now that the narrator understands what went wrong, they can take steps to ensure they never repeat the same cycle. 1. Being cautious about on and off relationships. If a relationship requires constant breaking up and making up, it likely isn't meant to last. True commitment means working through challenges together, not taking breaks whenever things get hard. 2. Avoiding people who refuse to take accountability. One of the most frustrating parts of the narrator's experience was the gaslighting and lack of honesty. If a future partner can't admit their mistakes or constantly shifts blame, that's a major red flag. 3. Knowing when to walk away. The narrator spent years in a situation that only hurt them in the long run. Next time, they'll be able to recognize when a relationship is no longer worth fighting for and leave sooner. 4. Prioritizing mental health and healing. Before entering a new relationship, taking time to heal from the past is crucial. Therapy, self-reflection, and personal growth can help break old patterns and create a stronger foundation for future love. Finding strength in the pain. It's easy to look back on a toxic relationship and feel regret, but the truth is, this experience made the narrator wiser, stronger, and more self-aware. They now see the truth about what happened, rather than being blinded by manipulation. They understand that they were not at fault, they were simply caught in a cycle that was hard to break. They have gained insight that will protect them from making the same mistakes in the future. In many ways, pain is one of life's greatest teachers. While no one deserves to go through heartbreak and betrayal, the lessons learned from suffering can lead to a better future, one built on self-respect, awareness, and genuine love. The narrator is no longer stuck in the past. They are moving forward, stronger than before. After experiencing years of emotional turmoil, gaslighting, and heartbreak, the narrator has reached a point of self-awareness and growth. Although the past was painful, it does not have to define their future. This final stage is about healing, rebuilding confidence, and embracing a healthier mindset for future relationships. Moving forward after a toxic relationship isn't just about finding a new partner, it's about reconnecting with oneself, establishing self-worth, and creating a life that feels fulfilling on its own. This stage involves deep healing, setting boundaries, and learning to trust again. The process of healing from a toxic relationship. Healing is not an instant process, it takes time, effort, and patience. Many people who leave toxic relationships struggle with lingering emotional wounds, such as trust issues, fear of being manipulated again, low self-esteem, questioning their worth, emotional numbness or detachment, resentment and anger. However, healing is possible. The key steps include 1. Accepting what happened without self-blame. One of the hardest things to do is forgive oneself for staying too long. The narrator should remind themselves that they were not foolish, they were emotionally invested and manipulated. Healing begins when they accept the past as a lesson, not a personal failure. 2. Prioritizing mental and emotional well-being. Therapy, journaling, or talking to trusted friends can help process emotions. Engaging in hobbies, exercise, or mindfulness practices can aid in rebuilding self-confidence. Surrounding themselves with supportive, positive people is crucial for healing. 3. Establishing stronger boundaries. Setting and enforcing boundaries is key to avoiding future toxic dynamics. The narrator now knows their non-negotiables in a relationship and will not tolerate manipulation. Learning to say no without guilt is a sign of personal growth. 4. Taking time before entering a new relationship. Many people rush into new relationships to fill the void left by a toxic one, but this can lead to repeating unhealthy patterns. It's essential to take time to heal and understand what a healthy relationship looks like before dating again. When the narrator is ready, they will enter a new relationship from a place of confidence and self-assurance, rather than emotional dependence. Rebuilding self-worth and trust in love. One of the biggest challenges after leaving a toxic relationship is learning to trust again, both in oneself and in others. The narrator may have spent years being gaslighted and manipulated, which can lead to deep-seated doubts about their own judgment. However, healing means rebuilding that trust in oneself. The narrator should believe in their intuition again. They now have the knowledge to recognize red flags early on. Acknowledge their personal growth. They have survived something difficult and come out wiser. Understand that not all relationships are the same. While their past partner was toxic, healthy love does exist. Learning to trust again takes time, but it starts with small steps, opening up to the right people, giving love a chance without fear, and believing in their own strength. Finding happiness beyond romantic relationships. One of the most empowering realizations after a toxic relationship is that happiness does not depend on a romantic partner. The narrator spent years caught in a cycle of on-again, off-again emotional turmoil, but now they have the opportunity to focus on their own fulfillment. This is the time to rediscover personal passions, whether it's art, music, travel, fitness, or a new career path. Now is the chance to focus on personal growth. Build a strong support system. Healthy friendships and connections are just as valuable as romantic relationships. Practice self-love daily, treating oneself with kindness, celebrating personal victories, and setting goals for the future. By embracing their own happiness and independence, the narrator ensures that their next relationship, whenever it happens, will be a healthy, fulfilling one. Looking to the future with strength and wisdom. The narrator has been through an incredibly challenging experience, but they are no longer the same person they were at the beginning. They have evolved, learned, and gained the wisdom to never repeat the past. Looking forward, they should trust their growth. They have learned valuable lessons and will make better choices. Be patient with themselves. Healing is not linear, but they are moving in the right direction. Believe in love again, but only the kind that is healthy and mutual. Toxic relationships may leave scars, but they do not define a person. What defines someone is how they rise from the pain, rebuild their life, and step into a future full of strength, wisdom, and self-respect. Final thought, from surviving to thriving. The narrator has already done the hardest part, breaking free. Now, the journey is about not just surviving, but thriving. They have the power to create a life filled with happiness, peace, and genuine love, one where they never have to question their worth again. And that is the ultimate victory.